The following is a real recording of a real coaching session. If you're interested in getting some coaching yourself, you can find the link in the description. Thanks and enjoy the video. All right, I guess just kind of following on from what we talked about via text, I think a good direction to go in here is to start to put some energy into identifying some of those spots that you feel like maybe you're missing, or identifying some of those lines where we're, uh, you know, 2-3 barreling, and maybe we're trying to figure out like what we're supposed to give up on rivers and things like that. Right now, the the kind of central premise here, I think, that I would approach this with is that a lot of people are, when they're missing spots like this, it's because they are not arriving at the spots with the candidates that they're supposed to have in the first place. So I think a useful direction. Oh, that's cool. That's way better. Yeah, I'm not seeing you in like a straight line now. That's cool.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think the direction is to kind of focus the energy on, are we missing certain river spots, or are we getting into difficult river spots on account of not arriving there with the right candidates to begin with? Because I do think that when people struggle to find spots of like, oh, am I supposed to bluff this candidate? A lot of the time it's because they got there with a hand that's not really supposed to get there that often anyway, or a hand that is, let's say, I don't know, you have a missed draw and you're trying to decide, should I bluff with a missed draw? And, those might be situations where your missed draws are actually, you're supposed to be your give ups, but you don't have any other hands to bluff with. So you're either bluffing with a bad candidate or you're not bluffing at all. And that becomes a problem, right? So I want to focus some energy on taking a look at a situation where people are generally just missing a lot of their turn barrels, and just taking and seeing how that kind of affects our strategy by the time we get to the river, and how we can sort of correct that a little bit. So let me bring up
Okay.
Octopi right here. And in particular, the spot that I want to look at is a board texture where I think people just are really struggling to find barrels. So let's go right there. Can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So I've got King 8 as, oh, sorry, King 3 as the board texture. Under the gun, big blind, 60 big blinds. So we open big blind calls, and this is just a very trivial range bet board, right? I just picked this one because it's like B25, entire range, very obvious. And big blind is actually supposed to raise like a surprising amount here. They're supposed to raise like maybe 17% of the time, I think, but they still have a calling range that's kind of pretty straightforward, sort of makes sense as far as how it's going to look. And then what I want to start with is just looking at how our strategy is built across turns, right? Because you can look at turn runouts and you can see overall, how we constructing, or what's our frequency going to look like on various turns. And the fact that this flop is rainbow means we don't have to really focus too much on the suit of the turn card. Instead, we can just focus on the rank of the turn and what kind of approach we're taking here. So there's a few things to sort of note in terms of trends. Is there anything that jumps out at you here? Just keeping in mind that the orange is like the medium to big size, like B75. Yellow is smaller, and then once you get into like the purple and the pink, those are the reddish pink, that's like a bigger size. Anything jumping out at you here just from looking at this?
I'm just seeing like Broadway cards are betting bigger and kind of
Hmm.
everything else is just betting smaller.
Yeah, or at least we're kind of going with like a medium size, right? We've got a small size on an ace. An ace is certainly a card that we bet small at a certain frequency. And other than that, yeah, we've just got kind of a medium to large size, the B75. We're not really able to do a ton of overbetting. There is a little bit of overbetting on a king and some on a queen, but for the most part, overbetting isn't really a huge part of our strategy here. Can you think of why that might be on a board like this? Like, why might it be the case that we aren't really able to overbet turns very often here?
I mean, I feel like our opponent's just going to have a lot better hands if they're calling that overbet.
Okay.
Like full houses, I mean, king, minimum of a king and most likely a full house, it seems like.
Okay. That's part of it, in the sense that factor in terms of what their range for calling the overbet might look like is, that's going to play into it to some degree, but we don't really, our bet size isn't really influenced by what our opponent's range is going to look like after we use that bet size. It's influenced by what the range looks like before we choose our bet size. So
I
going into
guess
this street.
I guess I could kind of rephrase that too. Like a 75% bet is just going to work out just fine with our bluffs. We're not going to need to overbet our bluffs either because it's going to do the same thing. We're still getting a lot of these weaker hands, which he has a big line has a lot of weak hands here still. A lot of just overcards to the three and under pairs to the king that probably won't continue to a 75% bet. And I
Okay.
don't think we need to overbet there to get those to fold either.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that's heading in the right direction as well. I think the other thing that's the part that's maybe missing there as well is you're still kind of jumping forward a little bit to what those hands are going to do versus this bet size instead of what the overall range looks like. You did generally kind of, incorporate it there, but the missing ingredient here of why we can't overbet as much on the turn here is simply because the big blind or the opposing range that we're up against is not particularly capped, right? They're not going to be restricted to just a lot of weak hands. And the reason for that is that they're not always raising a king on the flop. It just is as simple as that, right? When villain can still have a king, we can't really overbet. And if they were raising a king every single time on the flop, now when they check call, they never have a king, which means we get to overbet a ton. But in a pretty basic way, we don't really get to overbet when they're not particularly capped. And when they're not raising all their kings on the flop, they're not going into the turn being particularly capped, right? So that is actually as far as we need to go when it comes to picking our bet size on the turn. It really just comes down to how capped is our opponent and how much capacity do we have to just shovel in money with our good hands. And in this case, it's not that much capacity, right? They can still have a king a lot of the time. So we don't have to go down quite often it's like a rabbit hole of trying to predict how they're going to respond to certain sizes. In fact, we just pick the size based on the actual range that we're arriving at this node up against. So that's why the B25 size, sorry, the B75 size is the most common size here, and the overbet isn't really used because they're simply not really capped on any particular turn. In fact, the only turns where they do start to become a little bit more capped, you can see there's a king turn actually features some overbetting here. And the simple reason for that is that when the turn is a king, it's that much harder for them to actually specifically have a king. And hands like pocket aces and pocket queens become really good hands that we're just looking to get a ton of chips in with when the board is king, king, three, king. So that's kind of why the B75 size is being used here. Now, the next thing after looking at the general sort of sizing framework for the turns here, whether it's this specific eight of spades turn with the B70 and B75 and B50, or whether it's a different turn, is we want to look at if we're not going to be overbetting here, if we're not going to be betting with a super polar range, we want to think about how our ranges are going to be constructed. Now, I do want to pick maybe a different turn here. Let me just go back to the runouts and pick one that's kind of a nice clean strategy. Let's see okay, so the jack of clubs would be like a really nice clean strategy where we have only really one size here. So let me pick that turn card. And before I look at the in position strategy here on this jack of clubs, let's look at the out of position range and just kind of talk through what the distribution of this range looks like, right? Because they have a full house 4% of the time. So some frequency, jacks full of kings and kings full of jacks. They still have trips 13% of the time, right? That's why we can't overbet here because they have quite a surprising amount of trips still at this point, right? The next categories down, they've got under pair, which is exactly pocket queens. That's 1%. They've got a three or a jack 11% of the they've got specifically a jack 11% of the time. And then they have, half their range is these low pocket pairs or these medium pocket pairs. And you definitely touched on this in your analysis there because this is a big chunk of their range. You're absolutely right that these are a big chunk of their range, right? And if we did overbet, these hands would have slightly easier folds. If we did go smaller, they would have slightly easier calls. So this is why the B75 size becomes really nice here because we just get to put these hands in a tough spot, right? We get to put 10s through 4s, all of this pocket pair stuff in a tough spot, which is really nice. We don't have to worry about the rest of the range that much because there's just not that much of it. They do have 14% straight draws here, but that's mostly ace queen. It's just accounted for by ace queen being a high frequency here. So really we're focused on those middle pocket pairs. So let's talk through a little bit. Given that we're using the B75 size, we're kind of targeting those middle pocket pairs to put them in tough spots. What do we think are some of the types of hands that the under the gun player is going to want to bluff with here? What are some of the turn bluffs that we think are going to be most applicable?
Probably just our high card non-pair hands, like ace high, queen high maybe type hands.
Let's be more specific because we have a lot of ace high and queen high that we could use. What kind of properties do we want to have here for betting the turn? What do we want to look out for in terms of how we're choosing these turn bets?
I mean, I feel like we don't really want to have. I mean, it's kind of hard not to have all of those in our hand, but don't want to really have like a 10 to a 4 in our hand, really.
Okay. Which
Just because we're
ones, yeah, which ones
just
would we least prefer to have in our hand?
probably, well, definitely the 10, but probably like 10 to maybe 7.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think the general idea here is when you're barreling the turn here, we want to unblock as many of the more likely folds as we can and block as many of the more likely calls as we can. Now, there's a couple of things that we can consider here in terms of that middle pocket pair region, and it could be that they are villain is potentially more likely to continue with tens or nines just because they're a little bit less vulnerable on rivers and things like that. But we also have to consider the other parts of villain's range. We have to consider that, let's say, they are going to have, like, if you look at the king hands that they're most likely to have here, king seven, king six, king five, those are some of the most likely ones, right? Those are the highest frequency king X hands that are going to exist in their range. So I think generally speaking, if we have a 7-6-5 in our hand, we're blocking king seven, king six, king five, but we're also blocking pocket sevens, pocket sixes, pocket fives, and we're not sure exactly whether those are good things or not, right? So it definitely gets very, very murky here in terms of which combos we would prefer to have, and this is why people tend to struggle a lot in these types of spots. So it's very relevant just to consider the unblocking factors, but also to consider the blocking factors against the top portion of the range. When we think about suits, what suits do we think we prefer to have when we're barreling this turn?
Probably diamonds and hearts or spades, I guess.
Yeah. Well, okay. Let's be, I
Just
don't want to say,
not clubs essentially,
why would we not want to have clubs?
because then it's more likely that they have a backdoor flush draw here, and
Okay. If they have a backdoor flush draw, are they more likely to call or less likely to call?
I mean they'll still probably call. I guess I'm still looking more towards the future right now, which I probably shouldn't be right now, but
I think what we're kind of thinking of here is I think we're getting a little bit tied up in thinking about like what they're going to do with that backdoor flush draw in future, like you say. In fact, we just want to focus on this street right now, and there's a couple of things about the suits that we can kind of identify here. First thing is if we have clubs, we inherently get more folds, right? So that's just a good thing. So having clubs is a good thing here. The second thing is that if we have diamonds or hearts, do we get more folds or fewer folds?
fewer.
Yeah. So diamonds or hearts are not particularly great to have here, right? And this is another pretty common thing that I think people miss is that when you have a missed backdoor, like if you have a flopped backdoor that didn't pick up the backdoor, quite often those are not great hands to barrel with because you're blocking all of your opponent's flopped backdoors that missed, right? So you might see here that the most common suits or the most likely suits that we're going to want to have are going to be clubs because we're going to be blocking some of those club draw continues. Like we're going to be blocking maybe stuff like ace 10 of clubs that would have continued again on the turn here. And spades. We're gonna like having spades here because even though we don't block any clubs when we have spades, we obviously are unblocking all of the weakest backdoor type hands that might have continued on flop. So let's take a look at how in
I
position
guess we're
actually.
we're
Go
blocking
ahead.
their king X of spades also,
Yeah,
depending on what spade we have. But
precisely. Yeah, that's going to be another kind of minor factor there as well. So this is the turn strategy. And what we want is we want to kind of identify, where the bluff region is being drawn from. So I'm going to highlight specifically everything that is ace high and worse, right? I'm just going to highlight ace high, combo draw, straight draw, flush draw, nothing. And there's a couple of things that we can sort of note here. First of all, I don't know why ace king is in. Oh, wait, hang on a minute. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of all the draws for now. I'm just going to focus on ace high and nothing. So ace queen, basically 100% bet, right? All the ace queens here. They are a combination of, they have some equity. They block some of the strongest traps. They block queen jack. They block ace jack that turned some additional equity. And then we've got ace 10, ace 9. Basically, almost all the suits here. Ace 10, ace 9, ace 8, high frequency, ace 7, ace 6 also in there with the clubs being the priority, followed by spades. This is a good example here of what I was talking about. But if we have ace 5, we prefer to have clubs. Then we want spades, and then we want hearts or diamonds, right? Spades are the second best suit for us to have here. And most of the time on any given in any given turn scenario, you can rank the suits in that way, right? You can say, okay, what's the best suit to have? What's the second best suit to have? And so on. And a lot of the time, it's going to come down to either there's one suit that you want to have or there's one suit that you don't want to have. In this case, you want to have clubs. You don't want to have hearts or diamonds. But even having hearts or diamonds isn't a disaster here. On some boards, it'll be like, I really don't want to have this suit. So that's the ace queen is ace queen, ace 10, ace 9. We're blocking like the pocket 10s, pocket 9s. Those are kind of nice here. 10-8, high frequency bet. 9-8, high frequency. 8-7. I guess these are the ones without the flush draw. And then we've got 6-5, 5-4. So just a lot of the low card stuff, right? And if I pick the suits instead, and we highlight this bar here is going to show us the overall range and the sub range that we highlight below it. If I go, let's say anything that has one club, right? One club makes us a bit more likely to bet. Two clubs makes us a lot more likely to bet. Two clubs, we bet 80% of the time here, right? So two clubs is clearly very good. If we look at spades, which was the second suit that we wanted to use here, one spade doesn't really have an impact. Two spades, more likely to bet, 61%, right? And if we go hearts, diamonds are going to be the same. One heart, less likely to bet. Two hearts, kind of about the same, actually. Two hearts doesn't really change a ton, but that's because this includes some of the value. Diamonds, yeah, same sort of thing. So basically, clubs and spades have a positive impact on whether or not we're going to want to bet. If we have hearts or diamonds, it's kind of a neutral impact. But if we were to highlight the bluff specifically, if we go ace high and nothing, and then we look at hearts, okay, this is actually betting a bit more often. So we're still, looks like we're just still barreling I guess our ace high and our nothing is barreling much more often than our overall range here. So we're just
so
kind of using.
in this scenario, I guess as far as selecting candidates to bluff or not to bluff, blocking their top of range is much more important than unblocking their kind of medium-ish.
In an ideal world, we want to have both, right? But when we are thinking about the unblocking aspect of it, we just want to default to what are the most likely hands that they're going to be folding. And if we look at what the obvious folds are here, like the stuff that is pure fold, the thing about it is that the pocket pairs are still a mix here versus the B75 size. So blocking or unblocking these because they're mixing, it is going to have some impact. And as you can see, like fours is less likely to continue than tens is. But the obvious folds or like the pure folds are everything containing a 3. So in this sense, because they're pure folds or everything containing a 3, there's not really any hand in our range that specifically blocks or unblocks a 3 more effectively, if you see what I mean. So it's
Yeah.
not so much that we prefer to have blockers or we don't care about unblockers. It's just that because of the nature of this specific board, the portion of their range that is the stuff that we want to unblock is actually just everything that has a 3. And that kind of means that our unblockers are kind of useless, or our unblockers don't matter as much here. But we do want to have, if we look at the hands that they're going to have here that are also trivial folds, if we give them hearts, we give them two hearts, the only hearts that are continuing are specifically ace queen high, and then, a jack or jack three specifically. So their hearts are, their backdoor hearts that called the flop. Those are trivial folds now. If we look at their diamonds, same sort of a thing, right? So it's a pretty clear sort of a trend there that those are some of their more obvious folds. So ideally, we would like to have something, to have the absolute maximum fold equity. We would be blocking some of the tens, nines, eights type hands, unblocking as much 3x as possible, and then also unblocking the folding, the hearts and the diamonds, the folding range here. And coincidentally, if you look at something like 10-8 suited, 10-8 of spades, for example, is 92% barrel on this turn, right? And that's because it has all those factors. 10-8 of spades is blocking pocket eights and pocket tens. It's unblocking all of the hearts and diamond draws that are folding. And it's also unblocking the majority of the 3x region, right? It's not really blocking any of the 3x to any significant degree. So hands like these 10 highs and below just become high frequency barrels. And I think a lot of these are the ones that people are missing, right? I think the ones that people are finding is they're finding some of the club barrels for sure. Like they're certainly capable of recognizing like, oh, I turned a backdoor flush draw. This is a good spot to barrel, right? So it's not like they're necessarily missing a lot of the club hands, but they are going to miss a lot of the random spades. Like certainly I think there's very few players who are finding like the double barrel here with 5-4 of hearts, right? Like people just don't do that very often. The double barrel with 8-7 of spades, that's just the stuff people are not finding. Even like the ace-4 of some of the other suits that just has a high card and an unblocker, people are not really finding that either. So it's just super easy to miss these spots. And then, when you get to the river and you're trying to figure out what am I supposed to barrel, it's natural that you're going to end up in a lot of weird spots because we don't have the hands we're supposed to have, right? So if we go through the B75 line and villain calls again, let's now look at our river strategy, because this is a node that it's quite a common node. We're at still a reasonably high SPR here. We've got 23 big lines in the pot, SPR 2.1, which is not that low for the river here. Villain's actually supposed to have some river donks, which is kind of interesting on this deuce river. But let's go show runouts. Oh, wait a minute. Let's go check and then show runouts. So our river breakdown across all river cards here, it's going to look pretty interesting because naturally we're going to have certain rivers that lead us to have a significant nut advantage, but there's also going to be ones that are reasonably favorable for villain. You can see that there's not a massive differentiation between different suits here, but if I sort by suit and then by rank, you can actually see that there's some differences going on, right? On a club, we're actually a bit more inclined to bet smaller sizes because the backdoor flush actually got there, right? We're not up against quite such a capped range on a club. So there's a little bit of some B50, B75 coming in there. And there's a few kind of trends that you're going to notice there in certain spots when a flush gets there, a flush completes. If we look at sorting by aggression, the most aggressive rivers for us are an ace or a queen, right? It's pretty clear there that an ace or a queen are the rivers that we're going to play the most aggressively. We're going to do the most shoving, or basically just putting in the most betting volume overall. Why do you think those are the best ones for us here?
I mean, that was our, you said to bluff, right? Not value bet.
But really just overall aggression. Why are these the best river cards for us?
I mean, our opponent still just has a lot of pairs right now.
Yeah.
They still have a decent amount of kings, but just high cards in general are going to be better to bet when they have a lot of smaller pairs below that jack. And they're just going to be folding a lot more.
You're absolutely right about that. I think the missing ingredient is that specifically these are the river cards where hands like pocket aces and pocket queens improve to a full house, So those are the river cards where even when villain has a king, they don't really win as often as they would on other cards. So these are the cards where we actually improve to a full house at a slightly higher frequency, and villain having like king seven or something just isn't as good for them, right? And then
Yeah.
by contrast, the worst rivers for us, or the ones where we get to do the least betting, it's a lot of the club hands, but it's also like a nine, an eight, a seven, a five, a lot of this stuff, right? And this is because these are the ones where villain is going to make a full house at a slightly higher frequency, right? They're going to have king nine more often. They're going to have king eight, king seven, all of these ones. So if the river is a nine of clubs, not only do they occasionally river a backdoor flush, but they also occasionally river a full house at some rate, and that's just going to slightly impact how good or bad that river card is going to be here. But what I want to do is pick a river card where I think people are really going to struggle to find the bluffs. And I think the one that I want to start with is actually just this ace of hearts. I want to start with this river card that is, I think, the best river card for us in terms of betting volume that we're putting in, because these are the spots where people are just not finding the barrels, right? So looking at the breakdown here, we have multiple different sizes that we can use. The all-in size is used quite a bit for 2x pot here. So we'll kind of focus in some energy on that, but there's a few trends that are pretty evident here, right? If we look at the first thing we can notice about the hand classes, it's that top pair and third pair are never betting, right? Or there's like a tiny bit of some betting with ace queen of spades specifically for one size, but we can just ignore that. So anytime we river an ace here, we're never betting. Anytime we have a jack and we went really thin on the turn, for example, we're never betting, right? All these, this region of hands is our pure check back range, right? And then the funny thing is that everything else is betting here, right? Everything other than an ace is betting this river for some size or another, everything other than ace or a jack. And we've got, some hands that prefer the sort of like pocket kings here because we're blocking all the king X. Like we prefer going a bit smaller to try to induce some raises. But we've got full houses, we prefer to go big. Straights we go big with. Trips we kind of mix depending on exactly which trips we have. King Queen prefers to go bigger. The other ones don't go quite so big. But ultimately, when we get here with nothing, we literally always bluff, right? Every single nothing hand that gets to this river has to bluff because we just don't have enough nothing to fill up a bluffing range unless we bluff all of these hands, right? And this is kind of the funny thing about a lot of the spots that people miss the most often is that these spots are actually quite simple, which is that if you do find the right turn barrels, if you find approximately the right types of hands to be barreling the turn with, then when you get to a river like this, everything is really simple because you just bluff every single bluff candidate. And you just have to kind of mix your sizes, basically, right? And we have no give ups here at all, right? The only give ups that we have are hands that improve to some showdown value. And so we check back because we win sometimes, right? So if we pick our turn bets correctly in a spot like this, we never have to give up anything, right? We just have infinite amounts of bluffs here with these hands because we're getting here with a very specific region of hands that are good bluff candidates. But of course, on different river cards, that's going to not necessarily be the case. So let's look at a different river. Let's look at one where we have maybe a different, let's look at actually the worst river, which is the nine of clubs, right? This is another river where people are going to struggle to find their candidates because the backdoor flush got there. So let's now take a look at what our candidates look like here. So sizing wise, there's a couple of things going on, right? We don't really have any all-ins here at all because we don't really have the ability to shove into a range that improves to, full houses and flushes sometimes, right? Now, the other thing is that even something like a straight doesn't always value bet this river, right? If we have queen 10 of queen 10 of hearts or diamonds, it's actually mixing checks on this river because this is not even that good of a river, right? Rivering a straight here is not as good of a spot as it seems like it is. So that's the first thing that's kind of noteworthy. And people will kind of miss that. They'll actually value bet too much. Trips, not really betting this river that often either. A lot of the ace, king, queen, king 10, king 8, also checking back. Overpair, never betting. So pocket aces never bets this river. We're obviously betting full houses and flushes, But basically, we're doing quite a lot of checking back with everything from a straight down to third pair. We're basically pure checking those categories. And we are bluffing, obviously, a decent chunk of some ace high and nothing. But there's a lot more need for being maybe a bit more calculated in how we select our bluffs here. Is there anything that's jumping out to you just looking at this in terms of which hands prefer to bluff and which hands don't?
I mean, as far as our offsuit category, I would definitely go with just any ace of club, obviously.
Well,
You're just
let's see if that's true, right? It is mostly true. Yep. Ace 10 with the ace of clubs. Yeah, pure bluff. Ace queen, ace of clubs, pretty much pure bluff. So that's definitely very solid. Yeah. We do want to have the ace of clubs there. What else? Anything else jumping out?
probably hands that have like like seven, 6, 5, just anything that they would have a king, like a king X with typically.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, if we get here with five high, it's pure bluff, right? All of our five high is pure bluff. Six high, though, not quite the same, right? So having a five and a four is okay. Having a six, having 7-6, having 8-7, all of these hands are kind of okay. There's some small nuance sort of factors here that relate to exactly which combos of king six, king seven, hands like that that the villain can have. But basically, these combos at the lower end of our range are pretty reasonable frequency bluffs here. They're not going to be giving up a ton. They're not going to be giving up super often. And it looks like what's kind of favorable from what we can tell is that we've got a bit of bluffing with 10-8. We've got some bluffing with ace-8. So having an 8 seems kind of nice because we are blocking king-8, which is probably one of their better bluff catchers here. But other than that, other than having these low card hands, we basically just have ace-4 and we have ace-deuce. We don't have that very often, but when we do have it, we always bluff it. So again, a lot of the hands that bluff here on the river are hands that if we miss these turn barrels, we can never bluff this river, right? Because everything that bluffs this river, except for specifically the ace of clubs, everything that bluffs this river is a pretty non-intuitive turn barrel, right? Ace 4 is not an intuitive turn barrel. 8-7, 7-6, 6-5, 5-4, they're not intuitive turn barrels. But if we do arrive at this river spot with those hands, we kind of have to at least consider bluffing them. And the other thing is that based on the nature of this river, because we now have a pretty good chunk of ace high in our range, we have 29% ace high at this stage. It's just not possible for us to bluff all of those ace highs. So we have to be a lot more selective, right? And that I think is kind of the essence of figuring out when to give up. It's based on the river card that comes off. How many potential give up candidates do we actually have? How many hands do we have that we could have barreled with on the earlier street that didn't improve here? And in this spot, because of the fact that we're barreling with a lot more than just clubs on the turn, we actually have quite a lot of different candidates that did not improve on this river. On the previous spot, on the ace of hearts river, because so much of our turn barrel was a lot of this ace queen and ace 10, tons of our hands improved on that river, which meant we only had a very specific region of hands left that was weak enough that it kind of had a reason to bluff at that point, right? So we always have to be thinking about how many hands we actually get to a certain river with that are capable of bluffing or that have a need to bluff. And in this particular case, the way that we would prioritize is the ones that have less showdown value, the ones that never win at showdown, as opposed to, I guess, like, ace 7 never wins at showdown either. Ace 10, ace queen. Okay, ace queen actually has, yeah, this is why we don't really bluff the ace queen without the ace of clubs here. Ace queen of spades actually has 3.76% equity here. I don't really know exactly how. I would assume that there's some small frequency of ace 10 that's calling the turn bet. Let's see what villain can have that's worse than ace queen here. It's got to be something. It's got to be some reason why ace queen has some equity. Don't know why it's not loading. Let's get back over here. There we go. Yeah, so villain does have ace high. Yeah, so they basically just have ace queen. Okay, so we chop. Basically, what happens is when we have ace queen of spades or something, we chop with another ace queen like a reasonable amount of the time. They have 13% ace high here actually, so we chop with another ace queen 13% of the time, which is why we have that 3% equity or whatever it is with our ace queens. But if we find these bluffs, we're going to be doing pretty well. And if we look at, let's say, what happens when let's say we just test what happens when we go B100, the primary folding range that villain has is all of these pocket pairs that are still left in their range. The hands that did call the turn, they are pretty much trivial folds now. And then they also have a lot of that ace queen high as a big chunk of their folding range here as well. So if we were to look at the stuff that we want to have or we don't want to have, we don't want to be bluffing with the ace highs because we're blocking these ace queens, obviously. And we kind of are left with a choice of, well, we can't really have the perfect unblocker here because if we unblock the ace high, then we're blocking this stuff. And if we unblock the pocket pair stuff, we're blocking the ace high. So
Right.
there's not really a way to arrive with, a perfect range here, other than to recognize that if we don't have a lot of barrel candidates, then we can just barrel all of them or bluff all of them. And if we do have a lot of candidates, like we do here, because we have plenty of ace high, then it becomes kind of necessary to be a bit more selective. And generally speaking, we would prioritize just ones that have no showdown value or no equity ahead of the ones that have a little bit of equity, that have like the ace queens and stuff like that. This is kind of how a board texture like this, where people are going to really struggle to find bluffs, is going to play out. And I want to look at another type of texture as well, because this is obviously a tricky texture to really get the hang of. But there's some textures where it's still true that people are struggling to find the bluffs. Let's go with this one. Let's go with the Queen 8-5. And let's go. This spot is one where it's actually from under the gun here. It's basically like B75 with entire range. So it's like a large range bet, which is kind of an unusual one. So we range
This is
bet large
single
on
raise
flop.
pot, right?
Yeah, single raise pot. So we range bet large on flop from under the gun here. Let's go. Let's just pick a random turn. Let's go through an overbet line. So this is going to be most likely an overbet turn. SPR is only 3.5, but yeah, we've got a lot of B125 here, right? So we've got a lot of big bets. And if we look at the turn and how we're selecting this overbet range, it tends to be pretty, or at least it feels intuitive here, that we're going to bet a lot of our draws. But if we look at what the draws are actually doing, combo draws, flush draws, straight draws, we're actually going to be quite specific in terms of which draws we bet, because obviously a lot of them have top pair and we're fine betting those. But let's actually focus specifically on the straight draws first of all. We've got a few different types of straight draws here. What jumps out at you about what the straight draws are doing in this case? We have a few of them specifically that are in our range here.
I mean, they're just mainly checking.
They are,
Like,
but there's some trends between the individual combos, right? What are some of the combos? Let's actually organize these by EV here. What do you notice if we look at this bottom part here? What do you notice in terms of like which combos are favoring check and which combos are favoring bet?
the non-wheeled straight draws, so the Jack 10, Jack 9, 10 9, they're checking more often, and the
Yeah,
wheel draws are betting more often.
yeah, we're checking these high straight draws much more often than you might expect, right? We're checking some of those straight draws, reasonably frequently. And a big part of that just has to do with the fact that if you think about the types of hands that villain is going to check fold on this turn, a lot of them are straight draws, right? Because those hands are going to call the flop and then they're going to fold this turn. So stuff like Jack 10, that's exactly what we want villain to have. So we can't bet that as often here. Ace 3, though, and I'm a little surprised that Ace 4 is not betting here. It probably is just a card removal thing to do with villain's pre-flop range, and also just the fact that the 4 actually connects to the 8 and the 5. So if villain has like 6-4, when we have Ace 4, we don't really want them to fold 6-4. Ace 3, though, we kind of like when they fold something like, well, I guess we just like when they fold those middle straight draws with Ace 3, I suppose. But there's going to be some nuance there. But basically, those straight draws that are kind of natural to bet here are quite often actually going to be hands that prefer to check, especially because they have really annoying spots if they get check raised, right? So there's a
Right.
little bit of incentive to check there. Now, if we look at flush draws, obviously there's a bunch of the flush draws that have top pair, which is we're going to be fine checking those. What do you notice here on the range map in terms of any trends about how we're playing flush draws?
It looks.
Let's sort by rank and then EV. There we go. It's probably a little better.
Yeah, I guess it's just really our the highest equity flush draws that we have, and the lowest flush draws that we have that we're betting more often.
Yeah, to some degree, it's kind of that, and
Kind of
it's
like being polar in our flush draws.
yeah, to some degree, yeah. If we look at the equity of the, oh, we that didn't change the sort by EV right there. Basically, if you look at what we can identify, we actually don't really want to have like a middle card kicker because we've got ace king is fine with just pure overbet, and then the stuff that's kind of more inclined to check is ace 10, ace 9, ace 7, ace 6, right? That stuff that has a middle card kicker is a bit more inclined to check because a lot of the stuff that is actually going to check fold the turn is going to have a 7, a 6 in it. And we want to keep some of those hands in the pot, in particular to keep some of the middling to weaker flush draws in the pot. We don't want to bet a hand like ace 6 of clubs and make like a 10 high flush draw fold. So we have a little bit more incentive to just keep those hands in. So there's a little bit of a trend there in the flush draws, but really I think the main takeaway here is that we can't afford to just like auto bet every flush draw, right? Because the flush draws are checking about a third of the time here. Even if you just took every flush draw and just mixed like a third of the time you check, like that's going to do better than just betting every single flush draw here. Like I think people just are way too prone to betting every flush draw. And even combo draws, the combo draws are strong enough to bet. But in particular, there's kind of an interesting thing that goes on here as well, where if you have a combo draw, if you have like the ace 4, ace 3, 7, 6, 10, 9, you don't mind villain, first of all, calling with, if you have ace 4, they can call with like a worse club draw, a worse, if you have ace 3, they can call with a worse club draw. But when you have 7, 6, when you have 10, 9, you kind of like it when they fold like jack high, right? If you have 10, 9 and they fold jack 9, you like that. If you have jack 9, maybe, yeah, they can fold jack 10, but that's only one hand. If you have jack 10, in fact, they really aren't actually folding anything better. And they're actually folding all of their worst jack 10. Like they're folding jack 10 without clubs. And you don't want that, right? You don't want them to fold the straight draw that doesn't have the flush draw because now you don't get to free roll them, right? So the combo draw, if they're folding the same draw without the flush draw, you don't really want to bet that. So again, combo draw is not necessarily guaranteed bets here. So I think these are a lot of the ones that people are missing. And then finally, we've just got like, if we highlight the ace high and king high, there's obviously a lot of hands in that category. And let's specifically highlight everything that doesn't have clubs. So I think this is, I think this is everything that's not clubs. There we go. Yeah. So there's a few things to note here. There's a few things that are kind of interesting and relevant about what these non-club hands are doing. The ones that are at the highest betting frequency here are actually some of the ace kings. And this sort of seems a bit counterintuitive here. Can you think of why ace king with no clubs might actually have a pretty good incentive to bet here?
I mean, just as far as like hitting an ace or a king on the river, you're just always going to be good.
Or yeah, you're going to be good a lot of the time. That's true. What else might be working in our favor?
I guess this is without the clubs, so that's not the case. We're still unblocking their hands that they want to fold.
Yeah, that's definitely a part of it, right? What are we specifically unblocking? Like, what's the stuff that is part of their folding range that we're unblocking now?
Just the jack 10, jack 9, 10 9. There's straight draws.
It is that, but there, in particular, there's a portion of hands that are better than ace high here that we're unblocking when we
Like
have ace king.
like they're pairs below
Yeah,
top pair.
exactly right. Now on this board texture, unlike the king 3 8, now we like having a hand like ace king because we're unblocking pocket jacks, tens, nines, excuse me, jacks, tens, nines, sevens, sixes, all that stuff that even though we went B75 on the flop, those hands mostly just have to call because they're just too good. And now we're able to bet these ace king highs and get tons of folds from all of that region, right? So this is a different spot from the king king 3 board because those pocket pairs are just a completely different level of strength, right? They're much weaker on this board. So having the ace king is really useful for that purpose. And there's also the added factor that when we have ace king, it's a bit of a merge in the sense that we actually have the power to get better to fold as well as getting worse to call. In that villain will sometimes call the turn here with a draw. They'll sometimes call with like ace 10 of clubs, and they'll also fold a pocket pair. And so when we have like ace king of diamonds, which you can see is basically pure bet here, sometimes we get called by worse and sometimes we get better to fold, right? So there's definitely anytime you can attribute that possibility, anytime you can look at this spot and say, huh, he might call with a draw here, but he also might fold a pair. That's a really nice spot to barrel with ace king. So that's kind of a fun one. The other part of it is if we look at the other hands that they're betting here that are just like king, ace high or worse, basically. We've got obviously some straight draws in there. Ace 3 is barreling. But there's also just some random air. There's just like king 7 of spades, right? Just like complete very bottom of our range, at some frequency choosing to barrel here. King 9 of spades, king 9 of hearts, king 10 of spades, king 10 of hearts. You can kind of see that we prefer not to have diamonds. There's a slightly lower frequency with having diamonds there because we're blocking the missed backdoors, which we don't want to be blocking the missed backdoors because we get fewer folds. But again, this is a situation where there are quite a lot of hands here that have to bet at a reasonable frequency that are not just a question of having equity. And I think most people, particularly when they're barreling from early position here, when they don't have as many hands in their range overall, they aren't able to really just rely on like having the ace of clubs or having like jack 10 offsuit or something like that. People are just missing tons and tons of these spots because it requires just taking the very bottom of your range and just blasting it off, right? It requires taking king 7 of spades and just blasting.
Which that's more of like that clearance bet that Sam was talking about, right?
Precisely, yeah, it kind of is. Clearance is nice. We still have the ability to hit a king. We're folding out better king highs. And even king 7 is actually kind of a weird merge here because it is still possible villain can call this turn bet with jack 10 of clubs or 7-6 of clubs or something. And we even, we get a little bit of a weird sort of value phenomenon out of that. So there's like low frequency of that sort of stuff. Ace 10 here, we've highlighted the non-clubs. Let's actually do the opposite and highlight the clubs here. Let's just get rid of all that. So 2 club hands, you can kind of see we just talked about the flush draws. Let's look at 1 club. The stuff with 1 club, we are barreling a decent chunk of king jack. King jack with a club is pretty good, especially having the king of clubs. Ace jack, having the ace of clubs is really good. Ace 10, having the ace of clubs, pretty good. So some pretty obvious stuff there regarding just having 1 club and favoring barreling. Again, some merging properties that happen with ace 10 sometimes, occasionally as well. But broadly speaking, the bottom of our range here, the stuff that's very weak is going to have to barrel at some frequency. And then in fact, we didn't really address like barreling with like bottom pair here or third pair, 6-5 and 5-4. Those are kind of interesting barrels because they also have merge properties to them, right? They have the ability to get a pocket pair to fold, but also the ability to get called by a draw. So those are kind of nice here as well. But essentially, the bottom line here is people are going to find a lot of the draws to barrel with in a spot like this, but our barrel range, we don't want our barrel range to just be super draw heavy, right? We don't want it to be, super concentrated around having clubs and things like that, because what we want is we want to get spots where, let's say we get called and now, river comes, I don't know, deuce of diamonds, complete brick. We want to be able to make sure that we have the right kinds of blast offs on this river. So let's say villain's actually supposed to donk. That's an interesting one. But let's say they don't, and we have like a nice clean shove or check strategy here for about B60 on the river. And if we look at the region that's just checking back for value, you can see it's essentially top pair, under pair, second pair, like queen jack is kind of the value threshold here. Everything better than queen jack, we're just jamming for value. If we look at the 5x region, oh, so the third pair region, this is kind of interesting. We have a little bit of pocket sevens and pocket sixes with a club here. This stuff was bluffing the turn at low frequency, and now it just gives up because it does occasionally win. That's kind of interesting. But 6-5 and 5-4, they don't win really enough. So they are just kind of mixing bluffs here. Low pair, like there's pocket
It's kind of
fours.
interesting seeing 6-5 is betting more, like a lot more often than 5-4.
Yeah, it's just going to be, small kind of blocking properties, I would think. If we look at villain's range in a second, once we look at the response, we'll probably see that villain has a bit more 6x than 4x in their range. It's probably going to be small stuff like that. But in terms of the hands that are barreling off, one pretty noteworthy thing here is that if we look at the ace highs, a lot of those ace kings that barreled the turn are now giving up on river, right? There's high frequency of give ups with ace king because of the fact that they were merging on the earlier street. They were able to bet and get called by some draws. The draws missed altogether on the river. And now, if ace king is up against a draw, it wins, right? So ace king actually has, in terms of equity here, ace king has just under 1% equity. So it really doesn't win that often, but it does win at some frequency, which is basically what a lot of the other hands don't do. Now, it's also noteworthy that villain is supposed to donk bet this river with some of their like jack highs and 10 highs and stuff, which is partly why ace king doesn't actually win here as much, but that's a minor thing. Basically, in terms of the hands that are blasting off here, if we highlight the nothing and the king high, there's a couple of trends in the sense that there's a pretty strong desire to blast off when we have specifically 7 high without clubs, and we're checking back with 7 high with clubs. Can you think of why that would be? That one hopefully is fairly intuitive.
I mean, really, we're blocking their give ups with the clubs in our hand.
We're blocking the auto folds, exactly. And if we look at specifically hands that have clubs, the only hands that have clubs that are barreling turn is we've got specifically king jack of clubs, and then we've got king jack with the king of clubs. Those are the only club hands that blast off on the river. Can you think of why it might be king jack specifically? There's a very specific reason. I'm curious if it jumps out at you. What does king jack have going for it here?
On why it would blast off here.
Why would king jack be the only king high that might want to shove river as a bluff?
I'm really
What think about
maybe
villains? Yeah.
blocking the pocket jacks.
Oh, close. Close. Think about villains' best bluff catches on this river. The top of their bluff catching range is going to be like queen jack, king
Queen
queen,
jack.
right?
Okay.
So if you look at what happens when we shove, when we have king jack, we are blocking. Let's look at what they're doing. Yeah, they're
Blocking
blocking.
king queen and queen
We're
jack.
blocking king queen. Actually, blocking king queen is more important because king queen is higher frequency than queen jack here.
That
But
makes sense.
you can see that blocking king queen is pretty important because king queen is pure call against our jam. Because king queen actually, when we jam on the river, we occasionally have queen jack, so they actually beat some value with king queen. And king queen is a pretty high frequency hand for them to have, so blocking it is really nice. And in particular, when we have king jack specifically, we're blocking king queen and we're blocking queen jack, which makes it kind of okay to jam the river. But with the other ones, we don't quite have enough blocking power over any specific portion of villain's bluff catches. The other interesting thing here is that Queen 7 is a hand that's at super high frequency in villain's range, and we like bluffing with King 7, right? King 7 of spades or hearts, we like to bluff this hand because we're blocking Queen 7, which is a pure bluff catch for villain. But when we have King 7 of clubs, we're not blocking that. We don't bluff that hand. So there's a lot of things that kind of correlate here in terms of the hands that we're choosing to bluff with and the hands that villain is choosing to call with. But really, again, this is another spot where we end up on this river with quite a bit of nothing, quite a bit of king high or worse, and therefore we can't really bluff with all of it. And when we're prioritizing, we're going to avoid bluffing with stuff that occasionally has the chance to just win by checking. But in particular, what we are going to do is we're going to favor stuff that is unblocking all of the folding range. Like in this case, a lot of the ace threes and ace four are really good. Then we've also got some of the king highs with spades that are just, villain can have something like villain can have ace seven of clubs, and we're just unblocking that, right? So we want to have a lot of hands that are not clubs so that we can bluff on this complete brick river. And if we were to change the river to a club, so river deuce of clubs instead of deuce of spades, let's go all the way through the tree again. Oops. Turn was deuce of spades. River. Oh, get rid of that. Reset. Okay, so 5-8, queen, deuce, deuce. That's what I wanted. Okay. So turn, check, b125, call, river, check. Okay, so now we're actually able to jam a ton on this river. If we look at where our value threshold is, every top pair plus is jamming at a decent frequency. King, queen, ace, queen jamming a lot. Under pair, never jamming, makes sense. 5x is now basically pure bluff, although sevens and sixes are not. That's kind of interesting. But if we get there with 6-5 of hearts, 6-5 of spades, 5-4 of spades, that sort of stuff is pure bluff. Pocket fours, high frequency bluff. Ace high now, we obviously have a lot less in the way of ace high, so we actually have to bluff with it a little bit more. We've got ace three, still high frequency bluff, ace seven, ace 10 of diamonds. Ace king now is not bluffing as much. And again, ace king, it doesn't really win very much here, but it's got bad blocking properties at this point. Ace king with a club, though, super high frequency bluff, right? We love bluffing ace king with a club, ace jack with a club, ace 10 with a club. We have all of these offsuit hands with a club that are really good bluffing candidates on this particular river. King high, it's going to be a similar thing. King jack with a club, very good bluff. King jack without a club, nowhere near as good. King 10, king 9, king 7, all of this stuff that is not going to have any real showdown value at all, but is going to be, blocking a little bit of that top pair stuff. That's going to be pretty handy. And then we've got the nothing region, which having a missed straight draw here is kind of bad because, when we're blocking the missed straight draws and the
What's
river is
likely they have that?
yeah, and the river is a club. It just it's quite hard to get this bluff through with these combos. Like Jack 9 of diamonds is like one of the most likely very weak hands villain can have. If we
It's
look
like
at the very
now. Yeah, it's like now they don't have Jack nine diamonds, they just have clubs.
precisely, yeah. So if you look at villain's range here, they have a flush 10% of the time, but second pair 31% of the time. An 8 is like a huge portion of their range, and they're folding it almost 100% of the time on the river. So the jack 8 is like the most likely 8 for them to have, but also king 8, ace 8. We really, ideally we want to open up as much 8x as possible. And then we also want to, if we look at the hands that do have a 5, there's some low frequency calls with a 5. We obviously, we benefit from unblocking that stuff. But really, because the bulk of their calls on the river are top pair plus, the top pair that is folding at some frequency, it's a little bit of queen 4, queen 3, queen jack, queen 10. So again, this is kind of why we're slightly favoring stuff that maybe blocks the stuff that's calling at a higher frequency. So there's going to be some nuance there, but really on this deuce of clubs, those offsuit hands with a club are the priority bluffs, and then the other stuff is, a little bit lower frequency, a little bit more marginal. And then on the deuce of diamonds river, we're kind of giving up a lot with the missed clubs, and then we're prioritizing the stuff that is other suits so that villain can have missed clubs. And we also kind of like to have a blocker to top pair as well in that situation. So there's a lot of nuance here, but essentially the starting point for making sure that we find the river barrels that we're going to find and that we get our give ups right and we get our barrel offs right is to set up by making sure that we have at least an approximately good idea of what our turn barrels look like. And most people struggle with their triple offs because their turn barrels are excessively weighted towards having like equity hands, draws, right? And if we avoid that, it's going to get a lot easier to choose those river barrels because a lot of the good river barrels are going to be hands that didn't even have a draw on the turn, right? We're just going to have to get there with just a pure bluff. And, those are some fun spots. So when you start finding those spots, you get a lot more river folds and it becomes quite easy to, accumulate chips a bit more consistently. that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know for sure, like I was missing some of those like just pure bluffs whatsoever, like zero equity bluffs for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I think
Yeah.
the big portion that I really wanted to look at, which I saw, was like when we're bluffing with our flush draws on the turn, and then we miss our flush draw, like which ones are we actually bluffing with? Which was in this scenario was the king jack.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I could kind of use that as a baseline and understanding it and get deeper into that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, exactly. If you have a missed flush draw, generally not a great bluff to barrel off, but if you do block some top pairs, then it can just about be okay. But you'll also see that there's some spots where if you have like a 7 high missed flush draw, then you can blast off because your opponent can just have the ace or the king high missed flush draw, and now you get that to fold, right? So this is under the gun big blind, but what we'll do next time is we'll look at a much wider range spot. We'll look at like a button big blind spot, and we'll take a look at how some of these same concepts work when we're dealing with much wider pre-flop ranges, and that'll hopefully really kind of flesh out how some of these principles are coming together.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. So I think
Cool.
between a couple videos with you and then the one with Sam, I think I could go review those and kind of just have a really good understanding of it.
Yeah, sounds good, man.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt.
All right, no worries. Talk to you soon. See
All
ya.
right.
Bye.